Well, hey you guys, and welcome back to Tomes of Terror, my little book review series. So, we have something of a wild card for you today. So, a few weeks back, I was contacted by a California based author by the name of Foray Jumpman. And he asked me if I would read and review his book, The Absolutely Fine novel, which came out, I believe, in October of 2023. Now, this book is actually the first in a 7-book series, meaning there are 6 further books after this one, which I'll kind of talk about that a little bit toward the end. Now, he did acknowledge that because I guess he had seen some of my reviews before and said, I know this isn't usually a genre that you would cover, but, I was like, you guys know me, I'm pretty open-minded, so I was like, why not? I'll give it a whirl, send it on over. Now, honestly, if I had to pin it down, I'm not entirely sure what genre I would call this novel. It's literary fiction, I guess, like maybe bordering on experimental fiction, I guess. Now, Foray Jumpman, I looked him up his bio and stuff, and he's only like 20 years old, and he has a unique voice, for sure, a unique writing style. He's clearly very influenced by maybe J.D. Salinger. This gave me kind of a little bit of a Catcher in the Rye kind of vibe. And he's also a big fan of like James Joyce, particularly Ulysses. So how you feel about that, I mean, that's gonna be up to you. Now, I'm going to note up front that if you are planning on diving into the Absolutely Fine novel, keep in mind that this is not just a breezy, fun time, like that you're just going to sit down with and woo and like get through the whole, it's just skim through the whole thing like in an afternoon or whatever. The language of this is very poetic, it's very prolix, it's very metaphorical. So much so that I sometimes found myself having to read a particular paragraph like 2 or 3 times to get a handle on what had actually happened. So I'm not a dummy by any means. So I'm just saying that it's a lot to kind of work through. So yeah, and it's not a straightforward story at all, like by any means, is what I'm saying. And the novel is made up of a bunch of different like nested layers kind of that sort of relate to several interconnected characters talking about events that jump back and forth in time. So like I said, this book is not an easy breezy beautiful like fun time at the beach or anything like that. This book is work. And honestly, it took me about 10 times longer to read this book than a book of comparable length. This is 290 pages, at least in the ebook version. So yeah, it took me like way longer to get through than would normally. I mean, a 290 page book, I could easily read that in an afternoon. This one took, I mean, I didn't sit down with the whole thing, like, but you know what I mean? Like, it took me probably like a week and a half of like chunks here and there, like to get through all of that is like way longer than I would normally take to read something like this. So, by all that, I'm saying that I found it challenging to read. And I will say, I think like toward the end, I don't know, like it took me a while to like, get on the book's wavelength or whatever. And I think by the end, I think it was a fairly rewarding journey, but not gonna lie, I did find it pretty frustrating at times. And like I said, it took me a really, really long time, maybe even to the halfway point before I really kind of got into it. And even then, I still sort of felt like I was maybe still like being held at one remove, like from the text or from the story, if that makes any sense. So, what is this book about, you might be asking me? And I'm going to say that that's not really an easy question to answer, because it doesn't have much of anything resembling like a traditional plot. So, I'll give you a rundown of the setup, though, such as it is. So, at the very beginning, we're in what I presume is a psychiatrist's office with our nominal main character, who was a high school student by the name of Manuel Swan. And he's been through some shit, apparently, and he's there for some help. Now, he has with him what I think is a garbage bag full of notebooks that he's just filled up to the brim with all his thoughts and memories and stuff like that. And some of these are told from the perspective of different people that he knows, or maybe they're just characters in his head. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just assuming that it's people that he knows. So here's a quote from the prologue that will maybe give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, and so you can get a better idea of what the writing style is like. So this is a quote from the prologue of the book. Also, it must be said that the configuration of the text may confuse the ordinary reader. Manuel had a dear pleasure of the concept of looking inside the mind of the individual. Therefore, it shouldn't surprise you to find the perspective change below the bolded letters of a character's name, as well as the implementation of years and dates. Because, in actuality, are these people actually characters? Heck, what's the point of using the word itself if the point of writing is to represent what the world is? And although this may be impossible due to the absence of some, an attempt should suffice your enjoyment, and through careful deliberation, with the help of Manuel's wit, we hope that our ambition would lead this work to be labeled as a document, not an embodiment. I remembered a discussion we both had, and Manuel cried, "I'd rather have the reader struggle instead of cookie cutter this mess." Alas, the puzzle pieces were meshed, the business hands were shaken, and the real timeline was set. It is with great honor that I have the privilege of recounting the times when he found out this intriguing stuff around Langston, where Boris Avenue is. Enjoy. That's from the prologue. It's not the whole prologue, but that's like a couple paragraphs from it. So after this opening, and I'm going to say right here, if you didn't like that writing style, if you thought that that was going to get on your nerves or whatever, then maybe this book is not for you, because the whole book is pretty much like that, okay? So I'm just telling you that right out the gate. So after the prologue, which, like I said, is the psychiatrist, it's kind of like a frame story, essentially. So after that, we find ourselves with Manuel in a restaurant bar type establishment in Langston, California, called The Laughing Stock, and it's an open mic night. Now, Manuel is supposed to perform with a friend of his named Desmond, but Desmond doesn't show up. So now Manuel is there watching this girl whose name is Daisy Welter up there. I think she's singing. And he knows that he's supposed to be up next, like the guy with the clipboard tells him, you know, you're up next, Manuel, or whatever. But Manuel decides to leave during her set, hoping to catch an early bus home. So while he's waiting on the bench at the bus stop, he meets this homeless man named Greg Zaletti, is I guess how you pronounce his last name. And the two of them kind of start a conversation. They start interacting. So from then on, the two of them develop kind of a friendship, and the narrative kind of switches back and forth between Manuel and also Greg, who sometimes talks about events in his life in the present, and also sometimes stuff that happened like back in the 50s and 60s. So there's also sections written from the perspective of a few other characters, such as the aforementioned Daisy Welter, who was the girl that was up on the stage. She's like this kind of popular girl that Manuel has a crush on, like, and a very talented musician, like everybody in town knows her, I guess. There's also a character named Zach, who used to be a drug dealer and now works at a dollar store, and I think is also Manuel's dad, although I'm not entirely clear on that. There's another character who is another musician named Christina Pollen, and she seems to have some kind of possibly homicidal beef with Daisy. It seems that they used to be in a relationship, but no longer are, so there's that whole thing. And over the course of the story, Daisy sometimes kind of has like scary or like troubling visions about Christina. And at one point, I think she falls in love with Zach, although she kind of dates Manuel too, which is, if that's how I'm reading it correctly, that's kind of an awkward situation because they're like father and son. But like I said, a lot of things in here, I'm not entirely sure if I got exactly the gist of what was going on, if that, you know, if what I said makes any sense at all. So Manuel also has a brother named Marin, by the way, who is this big genius and is trying to get into MIT. And it seems like that Manuel's parents are always like unfavorably like comparing Manuel to his much smarter and more successful brother, I guess. So, and Manuel seems to have some kind of like self-esteem issues about Marin. It's implied that they used to have something of a closer relationship, but then they sort of drifted apart as he got like, you know, super brainiac or whatever. There are also sections written from Marin's perspective, particularly after this one incident where I think he accidentally falls into a pool and like embarrasses himself at what I presume is like a swim meet, and like the whole school is talking about it. So there's that kind of thing too. Then about halfway through the story, there's another character named Jerome Armaton. and he's introduced. And he's described as like a middle-aged man pretending to be millennial-like. And he allegedly tricked Daisy into doing something that she doesn't want to talk about, and has what's described as a huge criminal record, at least according to what homeless Greg told her about him. So there are also sections written from his point of view. And this book is also in parts. So like I said, it's very, just structured in a really weird way. So part 2, some of that takes place 16 years previously and talks about Manuel's mom, Penelope, as well as Jerome some more, who for a second I thought the implication was that he was the same person as Zach, but I could be totally, I could have totally missed the ball about that. It's just some of the stuff that was said, I'm like, wait, is that the same person? I'm not entirely sure. And then the story jumps ahead 7 years shortly into part 2, and then goes into the POV of the elusive Desmond, who was the guy who was supposed to show up at the open mic night at the beginning, but didn't, leading to this whole series of events. And I could also be totally wrong about this, but I thought that since the whole narrative is supposedly told from Manuel's perspective, as in, we're essentially reading about stuff he wrote in his notebooks as he talks about these events with his psychiatrist, then all of these people's sections are not them talking. It's actually Manuel's perception of them and his perception of how they experienced the events that they're talking about. Like I said, I could be completely pulling that out of my ass, but that was kind of how I understood what the whole thing was. Because like I said, I thought the whole notebooks and the psychiatrist thing was like the frame story, so everything in here is from Manuel's perspective. But like I said, I could be totally misreading it. I'm not entirely sure. So the book goes on in this kind of fragmented way a little bit. It's kind of more a series of connected vignettes than a standard story where like one event follows on from the last. And it jumps from character to character and time period to time period, like pretty much, I don't want to say willy-nilly because there is a structure to it, but it might seem willy-nilly if you're not paying attention. That's the thing. It's like, it does have a structure, but you really kind of have to stay on top of it when you're reading, or you're probably going to be completely lost. Like, you really have to understand who is talking now, who are they talking to, and stuff. So you really have to, like I said, this book is kind of work. You have to like pay attention at all times, or you're just going to lose it, and you're just going to be like, okay, what the fuck is going on right now? At times, I'm going to say, and this is, I don't want to like lean too hard into this, it almost gave me a very, very slightly similar vibe to maybe like Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk, but not, I don't know, it wasn't as cohesive as that, not as satisfying, not as horror based, because this is not a horror story really. There is kind of murdery stuff in it, but it's, like I said, it's more literary fiction. But I don't know why I was reminded of Haunted, because Haunted is kind of more like, well, I want to say it's kind of like an anthology, but they're also kind of linked too. Like, there's a big frame story and they're all linked together. So maybe that's kind of why I got the vibe. I don't want to lean too hard on that, like I said, because it's really nothing like that. But there were just times when I was reading this where I was kind of reminded of that kind of slightly. So, make of that what you will. So I have to admit, I had really mixed feelings about this book. On the one hand, this is not a genre I would normally read. And to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of, not normally anyway, of like fiction that's experimental for the sake of being experimental. Because, I'm old, I'm cranky. I don't really have the patience anymore to kind of parse through these, occasionally, metaphorical and beautiful and evocative sentence structures, but that at times seem like needlessly convoluted, like to just get the gist of what's happening. You know what I mean? I shouldn't have to like read paragraphs like 3 times and be like, wait, what just happened? You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. I mean, I'm generally more of a no nonsense, get to the point type of gal. That's what I'm saying. Although just that said, I'd be lying if I said that my own fiction writing wasn't a tad overwrought and wordy and a little purple as well. So, maybe I can't afford to throw stones in that regard. On the other hand, though, like some of the turns of phrase in this novel are pretty spectacular. Like I was like, oh, I see what you did there. I like that. I like that. I mean, and you can't really help but admire the artistry of language that's, on display a lot of the times here. It's just that I'm not sure how much of it is in service to the story and the characters, and how much of it is just like flashy wordplay with really no inherent purpose relating to the novel's themes. It's just kind of there to wow the reader with how creative it is. Like I said, I don't have a problem with that in general, but I kind of like a form meets function kind of thing where it's like you have to have a reason for that, and and maybe there was, but I'm not really sure if I caught it if that was the case. I will also mention in passing that in this book there are numerous uses of the R word, which, I guess I can say it, I don't want to get demonetized, but, retarded. And I'm not sure if the author was using it ironically or somehow maybe didn't know that it wasn't a really cool word to just casually throw around like that. It just seemed like a really weird, I don't know, it seemed really weird to me, and it was used like a bunch of times, so enough that I noticed it, and I was just kind of like, that's a little strange. But yeah, so I just thought I would mention that. I was also quite amused by the fact that the author congratulated the reader on the last page for making it all the way to the end. And I was like, so, I mean, it's kind of self-aware in the sense that the author knows that this is a difficult read. It's like he knows it's hard to get through. And, so I thought that was like kind of funny when I got to that. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see what you did there. That was pretty hilarious. So I'm going to say if you're into kind of more experimental or maybe like postmodern type of fiction, maybe like something like David Foster Wallace, like Infinite Jest, or, Thomas Pynchon or something like that, you might be like the target audience for this because it's kind of along those same lines. You know what I'm saying? It's not really my thing. But I did appreciate like the imagination, and this had some really like off the wall energy. Like I was kind of into that. I don't think it would be enough to sustain me through another 6 books worth of it, because like I said, this is the first in a 7 book series. But as I said, I don't feel like I'm the intended audience. Like, to me, it came across as a little try hard, but I'm, like I said, this isn't generally a genre that I read a lot of or that I enjoy very much. So, other people might have a different opinion. It does have like a lot of really good reviews, like, several good reviews on Amazon. So, so some people obviously really liked it. And the thing about it is that Foray Jumpman is still really young. He's only 20 years old, and he's already produced like a voluminous amount of work, really, which is an admirable feat in and of itself, honestly. So I definitely salute him for that. So all 7 books are available on Amazon, and all of them can be read for free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. So if what I said sounds interesting and you kind of want to dip your toes in and see if this is something that you're going to vibe with, then, get over there and check the first one out and see what you can see. You know what I mean? From what I could determine, because I was curious to see what the other books were like, and the subsequent books in the series look like they kind of explore different facets of things mentioned in the first novel, at least from what I could glean. Like book 2, which is called The Absolutely Fine History, looks like it covers some of the stuff from 1955 that the homeless guy Greg was talking about in the first book. And then book 3, which is called The Absolutely Fine Mystery, that seems like it goes back to Manuel and Daisy and Marin and sort of continues the events of the first novel, except there's a couple of murders, so it's more like a mystery story. And then you have stuff like wild shit like book 6, which is called The Absolutely Fine Magic, and it has a flying horse on the cover, and the description on Amazon is 1 sentence, and that sentence is, "It is here that the laws of physics have now been extinguished." So there's that. And I kind of thought, at first I was like, well, is this just going off the rails or what? But then I thought, oh, well, in the first book, I thought Marin, the MIT genius, was trying to come up with some machine or some kind of invention or something like that. So maybe once it got to this point in the novel, something with that invention happened, and he accidentally that was what, I don't know if that's what happens in the book, but that's kind of the first thing that occurred to me. If that is what happens in the book, well, hey, I guess pretty good. But yeah, I'm not really sure. But yeah, so like I said, there's 7 books, and I'm not sure what direction they go with it. But like I said, this isn't really my thing, but it is apparently a lot of other people's things. And if it sounds like your thing, then go over there and check them out, because you might really dig it. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Thanks as always for watching. Remember, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you again on the next one. Bye.